Hey guys, I'm Jonas. This week we're going to try to get things finished up on this Kandi cart so we can take it for a test drive. So I spent the last couple of days here just kind of buttoning up some things on this cart that was little tedious stuff that really wasn't that interesting to try to video, and some of it I was just kind of figuring out as I went, so it's kind of hard to get good video on that. But I had some stuff really turned out nice here, so I'm going to kind of show you guys what I did, help give you some ideas if you're trying to do this same thing to your cart. So for my rear brake mount, I ended up, instead of trying to cut off the whole brake mount bracket from the right side of the frame and try to salvage it to weld it back onto the left side of the frame, I ended up just cutting off the little spacers that the actual bolts go through, and then I found some 2x3 angle iron that ended up just being the right shape and size and everything to kind of wrap around that caliper and weld those two spacers back onto, and was able to cut my angle iron to just the right length that I needed to weld it onto the frame. I was able to get this muffler to fit that I bought off of Amazon. Cut the head pipe down just kind of as short as I thought that I could go with it before it started turning to go into the head. And then it was super close. You could almost slide it in there. I ended up having to grind the outside diameter of the pipe down just a little bit to get it to slide into that muffler. But it's a good tight fit. We should get a pretty good seal out of it. The only thing that I don't like is this muffler just uses a set screw that's supposed to tighten down on the pipe, I guess, to hold the muffler down, which I hope it's going to hold up, but I don't really know for sure since we don't have any other kind of bracket back here that's holding around the muffler itself. You know, it came with a clamp that goes around that muffler that you could bolt onto something, but there just wasn't any good way to put that on there. So we'll see if we end up having problems with it not wanting to stay on there. May have to try to TIG weld it on or something if we can. I was able to reuse the factory gas tank that we took off of here. I found a different Petcock that could screw right into the bottom of the tank without making any modifications to anything. It was the right size and thread and everything, threaded right up in there. And then it's just a regular on, off, and a reserve, just like a normal Petcock would be. And it was the same size fuel line fitting as what the carburetor has, so I was able to just use the right size fuel line to go from there to the carburetor without having to do any adapters or anything. So that was a really nice, clean setup. It's going to work just how I wanted to. I'll put the links in the description down below for all these products, everything that I use, but for that Petcock and the fuel line as well. For my battery box on here, I ended up just using my CNC cutter and cut out a kind of an L-shaped battery box and then a bracket that goes across the top, and used a couple of bolts to kind of clamp that battery down into place and mount it in a spot where it's out of the way, but yet you can still get the battery in and out of there fairly easily, and it's not going to interfere. Like if we needed to adjust this engine farther forwards or backwards for tightening the chain, the battery is off to the side far enough that it shouldn't come in contact with any of our pulleys, our drive pulleys or anything. So I decided to use a lawnmower battery just because they're cheaper. You know, they're half the price of. I was going to go with like an ATV or a motorcycle size battery, like a YTX 14 or a YTX 20 or something, but those are about $100 to find one that's a decent quality battery. So I ended up going with just a lawnmower battery, which is around $50, so quite a bit cheaper. And if somebody has to replace it later on down the road, they're not buying a $100 battery every time this thing needs a new battery. For my wiring on this engine, I really tried to keep it pretty simple. I just dismounted and disassembled the ignition switch setup that came with this engine, took all the pieces out of that box that's normally mounted on the side of the engine, you know, the ignition switch and the breaker switch, and there's a little diode in there that's part of the charging system. So just took everything out of that box and then was able to mount it in the dash that was originally on this cart. The ignition switch was a little bit smaller than what the hole was, so I ended up having to put a washer on there to make it fit. And I'll probably end up redoing that when I come back to tear this cart completely apart and paint it and everything. So for now, just kind of set it up so I could test drive it, and then I just extended all the wires coming from there back to the engine, plugged everything right back in how it was. So didn't do anything real fancy on the wiring. I haven't tried adding any of the lights or anything else yet. So it's basically just the simple wires that we need to be able to start the engine, for it to charge, and then be able to shut it back off. And then I've left the low oil sensor disconnected, so it's not doing anything. I did have to replace the brake master cylinder on this car. The plunger for the front brakes was stuck down in the hole, rusted in there. And really, for as cheap as those master cylinders are, they're like 20 bucks on Amazon. It just wasn't worth my time to try to rebuild the old one. So just bought a new master cylinder, got it bolted on there, put the new lines on, and then bled the whole brake system, which went really smooth. I have a vacuum pump that I use to suck the fluid through the brake lines. So that makes it really easy to do just by yourself. You don't have anybody helping you. They can pump the brakes up and hold it for you. So just bled the whole brake system, and it feels really good, nice and solid on the pedal, so no spongy feeling at all. For my breather tube setup coming off of the valve cover here, I do have a filter coming that's going to just pop right into the end of this breather hose. So that's just the factory hose. I trimmed it down just a little bit, and then I'm going to stick a filter in there. And then the filter that I use has a loop on it when it's zip tie. So I'll end up kind of zip tying it down to this bolt hole right here, so it's not just rattling around. One thing I still have to do yet is get this blower housing covered up somehow. We don't want to just have it open like this, especially with the tire being right here. If you were to throw a stick or a rock or something up in there, you're going to break fins off and cause damage. So what I'm going to end up probably doing, the cup here that normally your starter would engage into for your pull rope, the back of it is a pretty complicated design, and I could probably design a piece to replace it, but I'm going to look online and see if anybody offers a kit that would replace this with something, just like a flat washer that sits down in there, and then a cover that goes over top of this. If nobody makes anything that I like, I'm going to just end up cutting this, probably just use my bandsaw, just cut this where it's back behind the surface of this cover, and then I'll use my CNC cutter and design just a flat plate that's going to bolt on over top of this, that has like slots cut in it that are going to help protect anything from getting up inside of here.